afternoon. This is Kim Bellafato from the Madison County Public Libraries. Welcome to our next edition of Spice Club. This week, we're focusing on a spice that has a lot of versatility, thyme. And it's a spice that could be used both savory and sweet. Sweet's a little bit less common. And as a savory spice, it pairs well with most any meat, chicken, vegetable that you have out there. So I hope you stop by and grab one of the packets we have available if you don't have thyme at home. Thyme can be used both fresh or dried. Of course, we're making the dried version available to you. If you use fresh thyme, typically it comes in little mini branches, if you want to think about it that way, and you'll push the leaves off the branch into a dish. Or if you're simmering something, you can put it in entirely as it is and then just fish the branches out later after it has a chance to simmer. The thyme leaves tend to fall right off. So what we're making this week is going to sound pretty yummy to you, I hope. We're making French onion stuffed chicken. So I want you to imagine the bubbly little bowls of French onion soup that have got crusty bread and that bubbly cheese on top. And we're going to kind of mimic that with chicken. And so we'll go through our ingredients real quick. So obviously onions, star of the show here. And I have 3 large onions. I think my recipe called for 4, but they were huge onions that I have there. I have chicken breasts laid out, and I've cut a pocket into the chicken breast. So you don't cut it all the way through. You cut it about 3/4 of the way through, somewhat evenly, because we're going to be stuffing our filling into that. I've got a little bit of vinegar. The recipe tells you could use white wine, you could use sherry, you could use vinegar. Honestly, I've made this using beer. A light beer at home works fine because you're just using a small amount and it's really just giving a little tang to the mixture. I've got olive oil because that's typically my preference. I have my shortcut garlic because, you know, I don't want to have to chop that if I don't have to. We've got a little bit of garlic salt, salt and pepper, thyme, of course. And the recipe called for Gruyere cheese. And Gruyere cheese is in the same family kind of as Swiss cheese, but it melts just a little bit better. Well, at my local store, they didn't have Gruyere readily grated, and it's a weeknight, so I'm always looking for a shortcut. So let me tell you what you can do. And I think the recipe says you could use Gruyere or mozzarella. What I bought was the Italian blend cheese, which includes a combination of mozzarella, provolone, and Asiago, which is going to get that little bit of a bite like Gruyere has. It has fontina, and then it has Parmesan and Romano in there. So I'm going to use that for all of my cheese mix so I can have that good meltability. Now, most of our work in the kitchen today is just working on these onions. We're going to caramelize them, which is kind of a lengthy process. So my onions are going to go into the frying pan. We're going to move over by the stove today, and I'll cook them down to get them a little bit soft. And then I'm going to cook them past that point where they almost get soft like a jam. They're a nearly spreadable consistency once they cook down, and that'll make such that nice filling inside the chicken when combined with the cheese. So I'm going to pop over to the stove, relocate you over there with me, and we'll get started. Hey there, so we're back and we're by the stove. I've got my pan going on kind of a medium-high heat. And I've dropped 2 tablespoons of butter in there. Butter makes it better, right? And I'm going to go ahead and put my onions in there. Like I said, it's kind of hard to see because I did white onions in a white bowl there, but I have quite a few onions going in there, and we're going to cook them down soft. Now, that's more onions than I would be using to stuff the chickens with. But what we're doing really is we're going to make a little bed of it underneath the chicken as well. So you have a little bit of both. And I'm breaking the rings apart because this will cook much better when it's in there in much smaller rings. See, I have a little hard piece in there. Let me pull that out. I'm going to let the butter do its job and just kind of eyeball it and see if it looks like it needs just a little bit more in there. The recipe called for 2 tablespoons. And I'm just popping all those little rings apart to make it taste better as it cooks down. Big pieces don't cook down nearly as softly as these smaller pieces. And so these onions are going to cook for about 5, maybe 10 minutes, because this is a pretty full pan, to get soft. And then we're going to move it into adding a little bit more butter in there and cooking it down to that jammy consistency. Caramelized onions have kind of a sweetness to them. And they get much browner and softer and golden as you have them prepared. So I won't have you watch my pan for 5 minutes with me, but I'll get these going just a little bit, sweat them down, and then we'll rejoin so I can show you a little bit more about that caramelizing process. So give me just a quick minute. Hey there, so I'm back and I'm still working on my onions, and if you look at my pan, you can see they already are reducing down just a little bit. And now I did end up adding a little bit more butter. I felt like it wasn't quite coating them at the level that I wanted. But we're going to go ahead now that they're beginning to soften, and we're going to add our salt and pepper, just kind of to taste over the whole thing. And we're going to add our thyme to it as well, about a teaspoon, and let it start doing its job in there. And you're getting a secret from me since we're sitting here cooking, which is if you cover up these onions while they're simmering here at the early stage, they're going to release a little bit of liquid, which will help speed up that caramelizing process. So I'm going to give that just a little bit of a stir. And caramelizing is kind of a labor of love. We're going to do it in about 15-20 minutes tops. There are people who actually put their onions on super, super slow, and they'll cook it down for like an hour to get it all the way down to that dark brown, you know, falling apart level of a caramelized onion. But it's a weeknight, so we don't have time for that. All right, so these are seasoned up really nicely. And like I said, I'm going to spread them out kind of flat in the pan. And I'm going to cover it with a lid because that'll help encourage those onions to release the liquid. You don't want them to dry out. And with salt in there, salt has a tendency to draw the liquid. You don't want it to cook away and be frying these onions. These are going to be much softer than that. You may end up with a few little crispy edges, but the point is not a fried onion. And my broth that I have here, if the pan were to start looking like it was drying out a little, I would pour in a little bit of broth if it needed just a little bit more to keep it from sticking and be able to keep moving it around. So I would estimate, looking at this, these onions maybe need 2 or 3 more minutes, and then we're going to get them moving around again and moving toward that caramelizing process. And I'll show you what that looks like so you know what to expect at home. So I'll see you in a couple of minutes. Hey there, so here we are, and I'm going to lift the lid. One of the nice things about putting a lid on there is you end up with some condensation underneath, and like I said, that helps draw that moisture from the onions. When I refer to it as sweating the onions, that's what I'm talking about, is getting that liquid to come on out. So my pan, as you can see, they're starting to cook down. They're getting a little bit of a golden color to them. And once you start caramelizing, you actually turn the temperature down just a little bit. I don't turn it all the way down to a low, but I typically will turn it down to much more of a medium versus a medium high. Because again, you don't want to fry these onions. The goal isn't nice fried crispy onions, but soft and tender. So let's take a quick look. I am going to adjust that just a little bit. And a little cheat, if you're caramelizing onions, is you can actually add just a little bit of sugar to help sweeten it and create that consistency. It's not in my recipe, but you get a little bonus when you are watching the video. You don't use a whole lot. I might use just a teaspoon into this whole pile of onions. And that, again, is just to add to the natural sweetness that onions have. You don't usually think of onions as being sweet, but they do have a natural ability as they caramelize and as they cook to pick up a sweetness. I'm just tucking that around in there. So I'm going to cover these up and keep drawing that moisture and watching them to make sure that they don't burn. I've got my broth handy if it starts looking like they need a little bit more liquid, but I think we're in good shape right now. So I'm going to cover that. So to be efficient on time, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and season up our chicken breasts. And so we're going to season that with garlic powder, salt, pepper, and our thyme, just a little bit in. And you're going to open up that pocket that we made, and we're going to season the inside and the outside on these. Now, you're going to see me, I have garlic salt because that was what was available to me. And so I won't add additional salt, or that would just be terribly unpleasant. So I'm going to season the outside with all of my ingredients. So salt, pepper, and thyme. Now I'm going to flip it over, and we're going to do the same thing. And so if you're handling chicken with your hands and not tongs, I would always advise have a chicken hand. So left-handed here, I'm going to have chicken fingers on this side, flip my chicken over, and then use my right hand for seasoning. Keeps you from spreading chicken juice everywhere. All right, so I've seasoned that outside. That's really just to give a nice coating to this chicken. This doesn't get dipped or breaded or flour or any of those kinds of things. And so it's nice. Oop, I almost did it with my chicken fingers. There we go. Just kind of just gives a nice flavor to everything. All right, so I've done the top and the bottom. And now using my chicken hand here, I'm going to season up the inside too, because we want all that good flavor inside and out. Got the garlic salt, got the thyme, got the pepper for each one. That's kind of peppery. That one's going to have a little extra spice to it. There we go. And it's okay to be fairly generous with the seasonings in there. And into these little pockets that we've made, we're going to be putting the onions once they're cooked and cheese. And then we're going to kind of skewer it all together to hold it in place. There we go. So everything is nicely seasoned. We're in good shape here. Go ahead and take a quick look at my onions before I walk over to wash my hands. Just don't want to risk them overcooking. And so I'm starting to see just a little bit of browning on the edges. And that's a hint to me that I'm going to go ahead and add that little bit of broth that we talked about, because I don't want them getting crispy. So I have my broth here. And I have a half a cup of broth that I'm going to pour not quite a quarter of a cup in there and mix it in. There we go. Just enough so that there's a soupiness to it without being liquidy. I'm not trying to boil these either. All right, cover them back up. And I didn't do a good plug for one of my favorite shortcuts. So I'm only using a small amount of broth, just a half a cup for this whole recipe. And if you buy broth in one of those big boxes or even a can, you're barely going to use any of that. What I typically use when I'm using broth is this product, Better Than Bouillon. If you haven't discovered it, it is a really handy shortcut to have, because you can truly just mix up and make whatever it is that you need for your recipe. So it's perfectly easy to make just half a cup to do it. And it has a nice rich flavor from the way that that's processed. So I'm going to walk over, wash my hands. My onions are going to keep doing, and we'll do a check-in once I reach that caramelized process. So I'll see you in a few minutes. Hey there, well, we're back, and my onions are nearly at that caramelized consistency. Let me give you a little show and tell. So if you notice, remember we had a full pan of onions, and now they have cooked themselves down to being almost a spreadable consistency. Now, for some dishes, even for French onion soup, you could cook it down farther, and it could get truly almost spreadable. But I still want them to kind of be intact as onions. So I'll let them be as they are. So we're at the stage right now where you can find that ingredient. It was an optional ingredient to add in. You could have done wine, you could have done sherry, or like I'm doing, I'm going to add a little balsamic vinegar because I have it.
And we're just adding an optional 2 tablespoons into that. And that just really kind of kicks up the flavor just a little bit, gives it a little tang there in the background. So I'm going to mix that in. This is called deglazing the pan. And really what it's doing is helping pick up those last little bits of onion that might want to stick to the frying pan. So I'm just giving it a quick stir to combine. And then I'm going to go ahead and add my garlic in. And the recipe calls for 2 cloves of garlic. And if you cheat like I do when you buy it this way, that means 2 teaspoons of garlic equals about 2 cloves. So I'm going to go ahead. There we go. And put that in there. And I'm going to give it a mix because you want to heat that garlic through also. Garlic is not terribly pleasant when you let it get too raw tasted. Get that going in there just for a heating through. And what we're going to do next, I've got the chicken kind of moved over here by me. And so we're going to stuff our chicken breasts with just a couple of tablespoons of this onion mix. And then we're going to secure it with toothpicks, or if you've forgotten like I did, I found some handy little skewers here in the kitchen to help hold it closed because that pocket's going to want to open up as we're doing. So we're going to stuff the chicken with both onions and cheese, and then we're going to put the remaining onions into our baking pan and cook those chicken breasts in the same pan that we started off with. I'll add a little oil, and we're not going to cook it all the way through. We're going to do about 4 minutes per side, just enough to get kind of a sear or a crust on it, and then this gets finished off in the oven. So give this a quick turn, make sure that garlic got heated through. And as you notice, my onions have now turned to this nice sort of caramely color. All right, so I'm going to get messy for this part because there's almost no easy way to do it. But here are my chicken breasts. And as I told you, I've cut a little pocket into each one of them. So I'm going to hold that open and put in about 2 tablespoons. You're just sort of spreading along the bottom. This onions, and then we're going to add some cheese into that. And I'm just watching this now on this low temperature, letting the remaining onions caramelize. So you see I've got it stuffed there. I'm going to turn my temperature down a smidge. I'm going to flip that pocket right over and then secure it with a stick like we talked about. So I'm going to stick it up and through. And that's just going to let me turn it as I'm browning it. So I'll real quick do each one of these. Again, a couple tablespoons in there, just enough to spread around. Let them each get a little bit of that flavor. And as you can imagine, the cheese is going to melt up really nicely in there. And some cheese in there. All right. Tuck all the goodies in there. And then I'm going to secure it again with my skewer. For me, that's just up and over. That's one. And the thyme and the onion and the garlic and all of that really combine nicely to create a really rich flavor inside this chicken. Give it its dose of cheese. A little bit falls in the pan, no harm, no foul there. Chicken foul. All right. Tuck all that into its pocket because I don't want it to burn when I go to fry it. There we go. So I'm going to skewer this like I did the others. Back in. So I'm going to take these remaining onions with my chickeny toast, I've got that, right into our pan, and I'm just going to spread that out. That's going to create kind of a bed for our chicken. So just give it a quick spread. The chicken will rest on top of that when it cooks. Again, that's just giving it that little bit more flavor. Awesome. Okay. I'm gonna give my hands a quick wipe here so that it's not chickeny. Okay. So I'm gonna add a little bit of oil to the pan. I need to turn that heat back up, much more back to a medium high. And as I said, the goal is not to cook the chicken all the way through. You're really just looking to get a sear on it. So spread out. I'll put each of the chicken into the pan there. And as I said, we're going to do about 4 minutes per side. And so once these brown up on each side, it'll go into the pan that we've got there. And I'm going to add the last little bit of broth into the bottom of that pan just to let it create sort of a glaze on the bottom side. Keeps the onions from burning as well. So I'm going to pour that in there. I'm going to let this chicken do its thing, and I'm going to step away and wash my hands and clean up my workstation while this is browning up. And I'll be back in a few minutes to show you what it looks like. So my chicken has browned up really nicely. And I'm one of those people, I like to get kind of a good sear on all sides. So you'll notice it's really browned well. And again, our goal is not to cook it all the way through, but just to get it browned, get it seared so that it has a nice little crust on the outside. I think that just adds to the flavor. Any of the little onions that jumped out of the chicken, I'm adding into the pan. Could only make it better, in my opinion. Got my oven off, and then I'm gonna just do a little bit of the pan drippings of that broth on top of the chicken, just to give it a little bit of that nice flavor that's there. This won't be like a true gravy when you go to serve it, but again, it has that nice caramelized onion flavoring in the broth. Last guy there. And these are going to go into the oven at 400 degrees for about 15 to 20 minutes, just enough to finish them. Now, it is very easy to overcook chicken, and so I always take its temperature. And the correct temperature for chicken to pull it out would be at about 160 degrees. You can eyeball it. Obviously, you don't want pink chicken. Rare chicken is not a thing. But you also don't want to cook it to the point that it's dry. So I'm going to pop this in the oven in about 15 minutes. I'm going to check and see what temperature we've reached. And when we pull it out, I'll show you how nice it looks, and we'll talk about what you can serve this with. So I'll see you in about 15 minutes. All right, well, our chicken has finished up, and I'll tip this pan so you can just see how nice and delicious it looks. I can't tell you how unbelievable it smells. Now, when I serve this, I'm going to serve it tonight with rice pilaf and probably a green vegetable and some salad. It'd be equally good with mashed potatoes or a baked potato. Might be nice with pasta that might have a little bit of sauce on it. So I think it goes with pretty much anything that you might be interested in. So I hope you enjoy it. We're looking forward to having this here at my house tonight. Got bubbly cheese happening all over. I might have to sprinkle a little more on top just for the fun of it. But we have finished up our French onion stuffed chicken. I hope you try out the recipe and you enjoy it with our spice of the month, thyme. And I'll say goodnight from the Madison County Public Libraries. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.